I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting to order and declare a quorum. We have 6 members present. Ms. Barrett is on her way. We'll start with item C, workshop session, consideration, discussion, and possible action related to the adjusting school boundaries for intermediate, middle, and high schools. I'd like to make a few comments before I open it up. Okay. First of all, I want to thank everyone for the feedback that we've gotten through this process. I think that we've learned a lot. We've learned what's important to you as individuals versus what you told us was important to us as a community. If you recall, the board asked for community input back in the spring on what you thought was important for education. Some of you didn't choose to use that opportunity to give us clarity on what was important to you, but you've been very forthcoming on your individual wants and desires. We've learned a lot about what you think is emotion and what's fact. Several of you have written very interesting emails full of emotion and haven't taken an opportunity to figure out what's real and what's not. It's amazing that this board has voted on several things that I think the 7 of us have missed. There's been behavior by parents that wouldn't be acceptable by students. Some of the things that we, as a board, have received from you all, I want you to know that your students would have been sent home for bullying. We need to go back and look at perhaps our school district behavior policy. The 7 of us, the 8 of us, are members of this community. We're your neighbors and we're your friends. And I think it's very important that you understand that the education of all 13,000 students in this school district is important to us. We have been a small district for over 100 years. Some of us were on the board when we went through the 100-year presentation. We have now crossed over the line to being a big district, and with that comes different responsibilities and privileges, and that means differences in what the administration needs to do, differences in the way that the board will behave, and more importantly, differences in the way the community needs to behave. With that, I'd open it up to any of the other board members who have comments.
I concur.
Leave it to me to, I think I'm going to try to get us where, in my mind, I'm moving forward, and I have probably struggled a lot in the last week. Last time we did a kind of a straw poll on the splitting of the schools. With the information that I looked at, and a lot of it has to do with transportation. The other part has to do with the breakdown of the schools. Originally, I was 100% in favor of 50-50, 50-50, 50-50. Looking at the data since that meeting, I'm having a hard time with the 85-14 or 85-15. I know that's backtracking us some, or it might just be backtracking me, but I've had a real hard time with that splitting. I think the final straw that kind of really threw me out of that boat was looking at the transportation issues that we have now, and to me would, be doubling or tripling that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Schaefer. Anybody else?
I want to say that while we have gotten a lot of email that has been quite surprising at times, I do think there has been some email to balance that out that has been positive. And also, I'd gotten to the point last week where I really didn't even want to come out of my house. And fortunately, I have a family that's very supportive, and I did come out of the House, and what I found was there are people who really do appreciate the fact that we are looking at this and from all angles. I think the community needs to understand that there were 4 of us that did not sit in on that community committee that gave us a recommendation, and I was elected to look at what their recommendation was. I think they understood that we were going to look at the recommendation and to ask questions, and I think some hysteria came out of some of those question asking, which is what we do on a monthly basis and have done for years. This is not the first rezoning that I've been a part of. We asked questions before. Don't know that I know that I was not so brutally attacked for asking questions as I have been this time. I do respect the work of the committee, and as I do think that everyone here does. Don't believe that, I've worked with these people a long time. I don't believe anybody has a specific vendetta about anybody. We're just trying to get to the right answer. And what's hard about this particular issue, in my mind, is that there's not an exact right answer. Because if there were, we'd all be there, because we've worked a long time between the committee and ourselves. And the administration works very diligently to find that answer. I don't know still that we are going to have the perfect answer when we get to the end of this. But I do know that we've worked hard to find the best right, the next, as someone told me today, the next best right answer, which is a step-by-step process. And I found myself this afternoon going, you know what, I want to fix this, not only for, I really do think we take to heart all the kids, and whether that is what you think or not, I do think about all of them, and I do think about the different personalities. My goodness, I've got 4 kids that have 4 different personalities that have married 2 different personalities from them, and a granddaughter that has yet another personality. So I do take into account those things, but I do think that as a board, we're going to have to make the next best right answer. And all the things that have been put before us, there are merits to all of them, and there are cons to all of them. And I hope that, my hope for this evening is that we can continue to work through without being, continue to do a work that we have done for years, and rely on each other to bring things to the table and to analyze those and to try to move forward with the best we can. That would be my comment for now until.
No, thank you. Anybody else? One of the things that has become very obvious is that we've gotten kind of, as a community, stuck in the way that we've always done things. And perhaps one of the things that I've learned from the information that we've gotten is that we need to focus on what some of you talked about was so important, in that, you know, with athletics and fine arts, and that it's important that your children have continuity in that. And that comes from agility and having them go back and practice. And one of the things I think we need to focus on as an administration and board, and particularly our team of 8, is the agility and the change of the organization. There's been a lot of facts that have come out regarding capacity, and I think one of the things that as a board we seem to really be struggling with is middle school 3. There's a lot of discussion on whether or not planning out 5 years from now, the school being completely full and past its capacity, how that sits with the tax dollars that you all are paying, versus, you know, having the split between 85 to 15%, as Mr. Schaefer said. And I think that we have looked at a number of different scenarios trying to resolve that. One of the things that then has brought me to conclude personally is that perhaps we need to go back and look at our shared values that we have and the core beliefs that we have for the students in the school district. And I think all of us fundamentally believe that each student needs to be a critical thinker, problem solver, and possess the knowledge and skills to be a productive and responsible citizen in the global marketplace. We all believe that. That's something that we all as a team wrote. That wasn't something that someone else wrote and left for us. That is something that we go back and look at on a yearly basis to ensure that that is what our driving force is. The part that's important, I think, is that the education of each student is the responsibility of the district, the student, the family, and the community. So all of us have to work together for the betterment of all 13,000 students. And with that being said, I think that we have learned some things that as we've grown that are more important to you than perhaps have been important to parents of the past. Mr. Schaefer talked about distance of travel. And while I'm very sensitive that that is a big issue for those of you who perhaps don't have the challenge of driving your students today long distances, there are several families within this district that drive as far as 15, 16 miles to get their kids to school. So it's not something that isn't already being done. Is that ideal? No, it's not. But we have to go back and look at where the school districts, school buildings that we currently have are. What I'd like to see is if tonight that we can get a recommendation and move forward for the fact that we have the intermediate school opening in less than 12 months. But I also think that it's very important to say to the community and to this board, I think that with what we have learned over the last month and a half, that perhaps it's important to us to go back and look at the issues and provide a little bit more I hate to say, but granularity on what we mean on certain words. Some of the things that have been difficult for each one of us to then define is what does disadvantage mean. I think we need to look at that void of having it being someone's child, because not that children are not important, and please do not misunderstand what I'm saying, but we have to be sure we understand what the answer is and then implement it in the best way that we can for this school district. We have a common agenda, we know that, but if we're going to have a collective impact, we have to also have a shared measurement system, and we need to be sure that you as parents understand what that is. We thought we were putting things out so you would understand. What became clear is that perhaps the method of communication that we have used has not been as robust as perhaps we would like it to be, or maybe it is a case where everything's fine until it's not fine. So those are the kinds of things that I think that we will need to look at as a team of 8. We're going to have to look at this more frequently, and I know that it shudders. I shudder to even think about it, but in reality, the minute we're done with making a recommendation tonight, we're going to be thinking about what happens next. If you recall, the voters of this fine community not only approved Intermediate School 3, but they also approved the building of another elementary school and another middle school. And that won't be the end of it. We've had lots of discussion on whether or not we have enough capacity for all of the high school students within our community. So it is important that we all understand this isn't the end. It is a case where we have listened to the things that you've said, but we're going to have to go back and kind of regroup, if you will, and say, are the 4 things that we gave the Boundary Adjustment Committee wrong? I don't think any of us would change that. We think that SES is important. We think that being sure that we use the capacity of the buildings that we have is important. We think that we know that we think it's important to take into account that this community is growing. And if it wasn't, we wouldn't have all these problems. We think it's important now to have a better understanding of what disadvantaged was. We were concerned of what was going to go on with middle school 3, or we wouldn't have put that as one of the parameters. We've gotten a lot of feedback on what that means, and I think it will be important for us to grapple with that as a concept before we start moving kids around. The other thing, obviously that came up that perhaps we haven't put as much emphasis on is proximity to the campus and unity and what that means. I think we've heard a lot from some of the parents on what they think continuity and what they think unity is. There is a difference of opinion within the parental units of the students of our school district, and so I think we're going to have to wrestle with that as a team of 8 on what do we think that will need to be as we're going forward. But again, I think Ms. Barrett said we got some good emails. We got a lot that were not so positive and helpful, but for those of you that were willing to, give us factual information on how you felt about things, I do think we all are very appreciative of that. But so if going forward, does anybody have any recommendation that they'd like to make or any other comments?
I agree with your, very much on your comment about having to sit here again in 3-4 years. I know there's some, I don't think any of us want to kick the can down the road, to say. But I think as we look at this, to try to get more fact-based, as you were describing earlier, is to have trigger points. And probably the 3 trigger point areas that would drive us back here to go through this, since we're all excited about doing it, is one would be finding a range on SES that, that I think that would be comfortable with if it, changes by 5 percentage points or 10 percentage points, whatever that percentage is. The other thing would be, depending on what we do at the middle school splits, if, again, I'm going back to the point where if they were all 50-50, I'd be comfortable. And if that would have been the magical plan that we would have today, if that number got to be 40-60, I think there's a range on that particular trigger point that I think we need to look at this. And then also on the school capacity, if we say got within, and again, I don't know what these magic numbers are, but say 95 or 97%, boom, that would cause us to have a trigger point.
And I appreciate that, Mr. Hurst. One of the things I think that we have Mr. Schaefer, one of the things that I think is very beneficial to us as a group is we haven't even broken ground on middle school 3. And for me personally, when I think about the angst that we've caused in the community for a school that does not even have a name, does not even have any dirt moved, and I think it gives us an opportunity to look at these trigger points and really come up with a plan so that we are comfortable with how we open that school and how we go forward. Because we're forecasting pretty far in advance, considering how much growth that we have. I mean, I think one of the things that, had we sat here 12 months ago, we would have said we had a certain number of students we projected, and that projection's wrong. Where they live, that projection's wrong. So for us to make a decision today without having more clarity as a unit on how we think that should be done, I think is a disservice to the long-term health of the district. And so I think there's been a lot of things discussed on that. So I agree with you that's something that we need to look at. The beauty is that's not the school that's opening in September.
I'd like to continue to have a conversation about the process of how this went. I'm left, after struggling with all of these different options that are before us, with the notion that every single decision that we could make and every single decision that differs from, I struggle with what the committee sent us, and there are some issues with that. I foresee those issues as we move forward. There's not an alternative to me that we have discussed and put forth that by changing that committee's recommendation solves those problems without creating other new problems. So for me, I guess I'm at the point now where we gave that committee 8 days and however many hours, and those people struggling with things for an extended period of time. And that's the solution that they came up with. Would there be things that I would like to see changed? Yes, but by making those changes, I create other issues that are clearly important also to people on this board. So given that we can't predict what capacity for things are going to look like 6 years out, I would make a motion that we vote on the recommendation that is before us that the BAC presented at the conclusion of their meeting.
Thank you. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Too early to vote, that's fine. I'm at that point now where they did, in my take, they created a situation that they thought solved our SES problem, which I don't know if we've seen another option where SES numbers are as equal as what that committee sent us. They clearly took that as a core priority. They went through the process. Are they, in my mind, creating us capacity issues? Yes. Can I tell you exactly when those are going to come? No. Can I see some writing on the wall as a board member? Yes. Can I tell you why? But the fact is, I don't think we have another plan on the board that substantially makes those numbers better in any area. On the very first time we had a conversation about this, I was the first one to speak. And at that point in time, I said I had a real issue with the plan that that committee put forward for capacity-based reasons. And that the only way in which I could vote for that plan under that scenario is if we were to come up with a plan on how to deal with, quickly, schools that were over capacity. If what Mr. Schaefer and other conversations that we have heard in this boardroom take place, and we were to come up with a plan for dealing with what is likely to be an issue for us 4 or 5 years down the road, recognizing that we've not had perfect predictions in the past, then I would be comfortable with that. So that's why I made the motion.
Okay, I'm gonna do a procedural. I'm gonna call for procedure here. In Robert's rules, okay, Robert's rules. Let's go there. No, it's Robert's. It's Robert's rules, so that everybody understands, because some of us have fortunately or unfortunately been trained in that. Right? You have to have a second in order to discuss the motion. Otherwise, it dies lack of a second. Okay? We can still, this is procedure, we can still vote yea or nay after discussion, so that we're all on the same page. Because we don't face this very, very often, because usually we come to a consensus oftentimes. I don't feel a consensus at this time. So he's made a motion. I'm not taking away from you. He's made a motion. I'm going to second the motion so that we can discuss.
So we have a motion and we have a second. Items for discussion. Ms. Barrett, would you like to start?
That's what you get for opening your mouth, right?
She's our new parliamentarian.
I've lived that life. I heard you, and I come into this meeting going, again, I can make pros and cons for the 100, 150, 50, and I'm going to say this, I find it interesting, there were several emails, in fact, that we needed to absolutely take the BAC's recommendation in one paragraph, and in the next paragraph said, oh yeah, but by the way, do 100, 150, 50, which is different from the recommendation. And so I get confused because people, I'm just going to be honest, I get confused because they really feel very emotionally, I just feel very strongly about the BAC's recommendation, yet they don't because they want the 100, 150, 50.
No, what they are, in my opinion, they are hypocrites.
Oh.
And I'm sorry if that's a strong word, but if you sent in an email to us, and there were a lot of these, you sent in an email to us telling us that the committee is a representative democracy and you have no right to overturn them, and that's what you should do. And then you turned around in your next breath and said that you believed the committee's recommendation disadvantaged kids in this district. You are a hypocrite. And if you then turned around and your third option was that if you didn't want to vote the Boundary Adjustment Committee's recommendation and you didn't want to change it to not disadvantage kids, then send it back to the Boundary Adjustment Committee and give them more information. That option 3 essentially says, I didn't believe the BAC had enough information to make a qualified decision the first time around, and you are a hypocrite. And I'm sorry I feel strongly about this, but we got a hell of a lot of those emails. And it's pretty damn clear that the people who wrote those emails could care less about the majority of the kids in this district. You care about your own, and you are being self-serving, and that is not what we are up here to do.
One of the things that I think we need to be committed to do is as Mr. Schaefer has mentioned, Dr. Weston has mentioned it, I think perhaps I've mentioned it, is that we need to go back and look at trigger points. And while I know there's a lot of discussion on the middle school, and Ms. Barrett, I hear what you're saying. Unfortunately for me, I get caught up in somewhat what Dr. Weston's talking about, the inconsistency of the message from the parents. Do this, except in this case, and then do that. And so one of the things that becomes very difficult in my mind is that because we have been looking at it at specific, planning units, for lack of a better word, of what kids might help make that number different, it's been very, very difficult, and I only said very twice, I probably should have said it more than that, to minimize the emotional part of the evaluation versus the evaluation itself. And that is why I would like to see us get to a point where we have a recommendation, perhaps vote on it, and that we go back and say, here are the criteria and the things that I think we need to look at. And I think Mr. Schaefer's pointed them out. What is happening in SES? We've got a lot of emails. You should have known, 6 years ago this was going to happen. Well, anybody that was so good at predicting 6 years in advance, I would like to talk to you because I'm in the oil business and I need some help in understanding what oil prices are going to be because, we don't know. We're doing the best we can. I think that capacity becomes an issue. There are subdivisions in this community that have been on the drawing board. They've been advertised in the newspaper. The developer says that they are going to develop, and they don't. And we make plans based on that. And we make plans far out. And one of the things that perhaps, to go back to a word that I used earlier, is that we need to put into place a process that's more agile, that the trigger points are not just the opening of a new school, that the trigger points are things like SES, like capacity, and allow ourselves as a team of 8 and with input from the community to get in a non-emotional way, and with the administration, some feedback on really what is disadvantaging middle schools. Because I think that with wrapping that around everything else that's going on, I personally have a hard time to know what's real and what's emotion. And because of that, my fallback position is when we had the BAC together, their recommendation to this board is that not disadvantaging middle school students would be to split all 3. Now, did they like the way that the percentages came? I think we saw with the attempt at the 12th hour to include some planning units to make that percentage different, indicated that no, they weren't comfortable with 15%. But I do think perhaps that it would behoove us to go back and say, what is it comfortable? Is it really need to be 100, 50-50? What are we going to do as a district and a board to ensure that we are rebranding and making middle school stand on its own, that it's not a case where we're disadvantaging that 3rd middle school? Those are the kinds of things that maybe we should have known, but we've never had 3 middle schools before. I mean, we honestly went to the community and said, what do you all think is going to be the issue? And what they said is all the schools should be split. And because of that, I think that we need to perhaps go back and give more guidance to ourselves and to the parents of our community on what we think that means.
Okay, back to, I'm really sorry that I set you off, Mr. Wesson. I didn't mean to.
So, this has been an emotional process, and I think everybody up here recognizes that. I don't think everybody who just whimsically sends in emails, which, I'm confident that every single person up here has read every single piece of information that we've been sent. And it is, I'll be honest, it is hard when you read one email that is very well thought out, very well reasoned, very well truly wants the best interest of the district. And and it's okay that we have differences of opinions on how to get there. But when every other email that comes in and pieces of information is clearly just somebody who cares about one person, it's hard not to get emotional about that. Because the truth is, it's an enormous waste of time for us as a board. It's also an enormous waste of time when people send in emails and provide feedback that they know when they send it, the only reason they're sending it is to get a rile up out of board members, and they hope to get a response so that they can frame things their own way. And I find that, we got an email this morning. Through this whole process, I think it's important for people to know this. I have questioned numerous times why am I sitting here? Why have I spent 500 hours of service over the last 3 years just to have to deal with people who want to spout crap off and write stuff online, calling us liars, people of low integrity, people who aren't making decisions for the right reasons. And even when they think they're doing this on their own secret little website, guess what? It still gets out. and people forward that information to our families, to our kids. We have been publicly ridiculed. People have made comments about our appearance, about the way we talk, about stuff that is just, at the end of the day, you would punish your kids for that. And if your first thought is when I said that, oh, there's no way I would ever say that stuff in front of my kids, well, let that sink in for a second. Because we are community members who, although, yes, we had to go through an election, we are not politicians. And we are not getting paid for this. And I can tell you what, after all of the different things that's happened through this process, why anybody would ever volunteer to be a school board member is beyond me. And I'll probably get over this, right? When this is all said and done, I'll look back and say, hey, the fact is some people showed their character through this process, and you just got to let it go. But the fact is, I know that 6 years ago when this board went through it, and I was not on the board, I watched it then. And I did not think that it would be this bad. I really didn't. But it has been. It's been miserable, and it affects your family. So I apologize for last. You have to rise. We have to rise above to make the right decision for the district. We have to be logical and not let things get to us. When the board ended 6 years ago, and I'm sure, if you're on city council, you just let stuff go all the time. Maybe you're used to it. But I can tell you what, I don't care about certain people's votes, and I don't care about certain people's opinions. And I will tell you, if you are one of the people that are out there that have acted this way over the last 2 weeks, where I've had my integrity called into question more times than over the course of my entire life. In junior high, my son would come home, and we'd be having conversations. And he would look upset about something, and I would say, Dylan, what's going on? What's wrong? And he would say, oh, well, Timmy said this about me. And I would say, he did? That doesn't sound like Timmy. He goes, well, that's what Bobby said Timmy said. And so I said, well, did you talk to Timmy about it? No. Well, perhaps, maybe, does it sound like Timmy would say something like that? I mean, you know Timmy. You've known Timmy for a long time. Well, why don't you ask Timmy whether he actually said it or not, as opposed to accusing him of doing something, and it was just simply something somebody else said, and perhaps there was a miscommunication. I do my best for the people in my family to act that way, and I believe most of the people that are sitting up here on the board, all of the people sitting up here on the board, are the same way. And we can either choose to say, we're just going to sit here and take it and not say anything about how this process has worked out, but I can tell you I won't be one of them. Because you need to know fundamentally that character is not built during times when everything are going really well. It's built when you do the right thing, even though things are tough. I'll just say some of the people in this community, unfortunately, have showed what I would consider to be low character. And I understand it's a trying time, and if your goal is to say, well, this is just emotional and it's my kids, well, this is exactly the time when character should show, and it should show for them. I'm sorry, I'm done.
We do it because we love the kids. And
That was a point, right? We got the email this morning. And somebody had said, thankfully, it just made me breathe a little bit easier, I think. You know, all of this entire conversation, everything that we've been going through it's all about the parents. It's not about the kids. The kids don't know this is going on unless the parents have made it a big deal in their house. They know rezoning is going on, but man, far and away the majority of them are just not worried about the same kinds of things that folks are. And we'll continue to make the best choices for the kids in the district. So, sorry, little soapbox.
This is why we love you. One of the things that I think that we can maybe discuss, and I don't know how you want to discuss this, but one of the things that we looked at, and it falls in line with accepting Dr. Wesson's motion, is that the committee, while they did not agree with the end result, I think that that's been made public, the vote. Am I correct on that, right? Which was very close, which is what I think probably I've struggled with a lot, is that when we took this to the committee, it wasn't an overwhelming majority at the end of the day. What was a majority, maybe not an overwhelming majority, but a majority nonetheless, was that they felt like, the committee felt like they needed to split the 3 middle schools. And I've tried, you know, I really struggle with that. I really struggle with the 15%. I think I would agree that that's difficult. But I'm not certain that I agree with the options that we currently have on the table. And what I'm hearing you say, and I hope, because I want to make sure that I'm hearing you correctly, is that if we were to accept some form so that they could move on with the intermediate school, we would then go back as a board and re-look at our parameters and digest that a little bit more in depth. Am I correct in looking forward to perhaps are we saying that you want to look at just the intermediate school? I'm a little confused there.
So my thought would be this. If we were to come to some kind of conclusion this evening, we are in the middle of building intermediate school 3. And kids need to, we need to decide who's going to go to school there so they can start staffing. What becomes clear to me is that the process that has been used, and I apologize, Ms. Barrett, but you and I are the old farts out here. We have been working with this school district for 30 years, unfortunately. Or fortunately, not unfortunately, but it's been a long time. And so we've been through all of we've been either on the board or we've had our children redistrict. So, a lot of things that we hear you say, we have lived through. Now, I go back to one of the things I said at the beginning. What became clear to me as we're getting feedback is that some of the issues that we looked at when the community was small, are different now that it's large. There's a large number of you that have just moved here. We get a lot of email from people who moved here 6 months ago and, don't change my kid. And there's just a little bit of the orneyness in me saying, well, we're not going to let more people move here because it's causing problems. But the reality is it's changed. And so some of the things that also used to be changes because we were a small community. Some of the things that parents have felt comfortable putting on social media are different because they don't feel like they're going to run into us at the grocery store. When this was a small community, you knew everybody, and you knew you were going to see the board either at the grocery store or at the at the store, at church, and that kept us more socially in check than perhaps we are now. And so, okay, that's where we're at. We're a big district. We need to look at things differently. And so what I would say, Ms. Barrett, is let's get the intermediate school zones out there. We're building a new elementary school. Let's philosophically take this opportunity because we are in such a dilemma as a district and look back at how do we put in place the things that are important? I know we're not going to change our core beliefs. I know we think being a critical thinker is important. I know we think SES is important, though there's parents in here who perhaps don't agree with that. I know that we think it's important to take care of the taxpayers and not build schools when all the other schools are not completely full. But maybe we need to fundamentally look at how do we do that. You know, there are instances perhaps, and I encourage you all to go out and look at Frisco ISD. We're only number 10 in the state of Texas as far as growth. Go out and look at Frisco and then look at our process. Frisco has a website where they say rezoning. Click here, put your address. Oh, this is where you go to school. Oh, sorry, that school's full. Your child will have to go to another school because there's no room at the end. You know, you just moved into town, you put your new house in, and you're not going to that school. Now, I'm not in any way suggesting that we get quite that bad, but we need to realize they know it's an iterative process. They've gotten very agile because their community is grown so much. Some of the other things that perhaps we heard are continuity. What does a feeder pattern mean? Is it a case where we go back and we look at the elementaries, because we have to look at them anyway, and we say, do they feed into the intermediates? How does that go into the middle school? Because middle school split is obviously something very, very emotional to the community. We knew it was a problem. We didn't know what the answer was, so we asked the committee. The committee said split them all. Now, they didn't perhaps like the number. So I think we need to then go back and say, okay, let's look at that problem. What does that really mean going forward? You know, so the benefit we have is that the school isn't even open yet. And so, you know, some would say, well, go ahead and finish it today. And my recommendation to the board is we need to step back and philosophically come up with what we think the guidelines and metrics should be, and then move kids, because we are so caught up in the pressure of us even asking a question. Because as you pointed out, sometimes we ask questions over the last 2 weeks that had nothing to do with our hidden agenda, our desire. It was more information. But the next thing you knew, we were shipping people to outer Siberia, you know, and so we need to figure out what we think the answer should be, and then look at the student body.
Okay, so I'm gonna clarity for me. So you're asking us to move forward with this recommendation and then go back and look at what we have voted on?
I'm asking us to move forward on this recommendation, and then I think we need to relook at the process. And once we come up with what we think the process should be, I think the test case would be the proposal that's out there. And if it doesn't meet the criteria, then I think we need to make change. But I don't think that the process, we need to say time out. Because what we're doing right now is not working. We're moving little pieces, and we don't know where we're heading towards. And so my suggestion would be, let's sit back and accept the intermediate zoning and look at what that means going forward and how we think that the middle school split between going to the high school. Not that the middle school zone is incorrect. That's not what I'm saying. Where it becomes an issue is where it goes forward to the high school. How should that be done? And I think philosophically, we all need to discuss that. We need to get input from the community on the philosophy on what needs to be done. I don't want to hear, move my kid, don't move my kid, move everybody else's. We've got a lot of emails on that. You know, let me show you my friend who lives in a better neighborhood who perhaps you can move them. You know, I think that we need to step back because the process of a small community is not the same as a large. And we have now hit the critical mass. And it's obvious from the reaction that we've gotten from the community, in my mind, we need to regroup and head forward on the overall process.
So everyone would remain, okay, so we would zone for the intermediate school. And everyone would remain, obviously, at the two middle schools. Would everybody then remain, I guess at the, maybe I'm being stupid here, but, you know, we move that one line down for the intermediate school, would they then, everybody continue to go to the same high schools as well?
It sounded like to me you said, come up with a recommendation tonight, whatever it's going to be, whether it's Dr. Weston's motion or something else. Bring a group together in conjunction with the elementary zoning process to look at process and to look at belief systems, parameters, those types of things, the value system from a policy perspective that would drive the board forward. And then if there is something that needs to be addressed with current zones, to be addressed at that time. So it seems like to me it would be a check me if I'm wrong, it would be a recommendation tonight for intermediate and middle school zones, with there being a possibility of having to come back based on other parameters in the future. Is that what you're saying?
That's what I'm saying.
Thank you.
And the reason, but I want it to be clear that we've heard the issues that you have with the recommendation. But I think we need to fundamentally come back with more measurement, a shared measurement system. I mean, we have a common agenda with the capacity, with the SES, with the growth. But the measurement system for what's okay going forward hasn't been as clear. Does it have to be 100, 150, 50? Is 1585 not okay? You know, if it was 48, 52, would that have been okay? And I think that we heard from the committee, their recommendation was that perhaps it should be split, all three of them. I think we need to not, in an emotional dealing with somebody's kid, figure out philosophically what we think that should be, and then check with what we have and see, does it make sense? Because the other issue is, in 2 years, you know, I guarantee the number that we have on that demographic, you know, projection is wrong. Is it going to be too big? Is it going to be too small? You know, I don't know, but it gives us an opportunity to put into process things that Mr. Schaefer has said, what do we need to look at? And my recommendation would be, one of the things that we consider is we look at SES every year. We don't wait till it gets so out of whack. And we decide as a community, we're looking at SES every year. Everybody, this is the way that we're going to do it. This is what we fundamentally think makes College Station a good school district. Because some people say we love College Station School District, we just don't want you to do the things that have made it a good school district. You know, I'm with Dr. Weston on that. I can't follow the logic on that. So I think that perhaps those are the kinds of things, communication-wise, we need to, when it's not dealing with my own kid, make sure that the community understands this is the way boundary adjustment is going to be done, because we're now a big district and growing.
I'm just trying to digest this a little bit, and because it's obviously been difficult, to say the least, and emotional, to say the least. And if we reconvene, and I agree with this idea of the trigger points, SES, capacity, and any kind of middle school split, absolutely. Determining what those are. But right now, I'm just looking, it's October 11th. And these go into effect next year for intermediate, which obviously we'd be voting on tonight, but what about the high school? High school lines. I would think that, I don't want to say, sooner is not better than correct, or is the next best answer, whatever. Ms. Barrett, your phrase. I'm trying to catch up
my
here.
thought process with the high school lines is, because of the way that we've done the grandfathering, we just go ahead with the high school lines, and then we have to we need to look at, because the high school is out of whack as far as SES. It is, and the recommendation comes back and it fixes that. And with the grandfathering, it gives everyone a little bit of time to adjust. But then, because of the grandfathering, it also gives us an opportunity to look back and see, does it all make sense for what we think these other metrics need to be? I fundamentally believe when you're solving a problem, pushing through, even though you know it's wrong doesn't, you gotta start with a clean piece of paper and say, okay, this is where we're at today. Let's go back, because we have learned so much from the feedback. Some of it very, very positive, some of it very negative. But we've learned from it, and we need to incorporate some of those things that we've learned in our going forward, because as Ms. Barrett says, not only are we a big district, but we're going to continue to grow, and we need to be sure every one of us understands how we're going to deal with the growth as it continues, because it will continue.
No, I agree with not pushing through just for the sake of pushing through. But I guess and maybe I'm just not understanding the grandfathering, but if we walk out the way I'm understanding it, if you're an 8th grader right now, you don't know where you're going next year, or?
I'm saying that we would accept, I'm assuming, and I shouldn't speak for Dr. Wesson, I'm assuming by what Dr. Wesson said, that we would go with the recommended high school zones that the committee proposed.
Okay.
Yes. So here, my recommendation is, we asked the community to come up with a plan. This is what they came up with. Is it perfect? Can we see issues possibly 4 or 5 years down the road? The answer to that question is yes. I would like us, and I don't see to me, I don't see a better plan on the table without just saying, let's start from scratch. And I don't think that that's good for anybody in any way, shape, or form. And I'm not sure that we would arrive at a place that's different than what the community did at this point. So my vote, my motion, to clarify what I meant, was to accept the BAC's recommendation as is, period. I would also like us strongly, as we move forward, to develop a plan and a policy for at what points are we going to rezone, adjust the boundaries within our school district, and on what basis. I think Mr. Schaefer laid out some very good points. Are they the only things we might come up with? I don't know. The two big ones to me that come to mind are, obviously, we have to adjust when a school is over capacity. And to me, SES is something that we have waited way too long on, because historically we've only done this when we build brand new schools. And coming up with a trigger point, for lack of a better word, for SES seems to be a process to go through. I'm not, and I'm trying hard to follow all of this argument, all this stuff that's been said as well since I made that motion a while back. I am not saying to accept, the BAC's recommendation, knowing full well that we're going to come back in 6 months and make changes to it. I think it gives us a way forward currently in an effective way that they thought, and then once we decide how in the future boundaries are going to be moved, then we will take a look at where we are, whether that's a year from now something explodes, or 2 years, or hey, the numbers worked out just fine and it's 4 years and we've had no problem and life is good. But we'll come up with what those things are that we're going to look at every year. We're just going to look at the numbers, and we're going to listen to the administration, and they're going to tell us, hey, we said this, we believed that these 15% of kids wouldn't be disadvantaged, and now that we're seeing what's happening, we've changed our mind. And we think there are some things that we need to put in place to make sure that those kids aren't disadvantaged. Or they can say, hey, everything's hunky-dory and everything's fine, and we don't adjust our boundaries again until we're building a new elementary school or a new high school in 7 years, whatever that is. So that's my take, is we have imperfect information. We have a reasonable solution, reasonable if yet imperfect solution in front of us. And that I obviously made the motion that to approve the BAC's recommendation.
Well, let me ask a question that affects the timing of the analysis. If we pass that and we look at the grandfathering numbers, when would the administration like us to go to the public to approve a bond to build Phase 2 of College Station High School?
There's several factors that go into calling a bond, but as we have discussed it, we'd like to see if we could get to fall of 2018 before having to go back to the voters again for a bond. Part of that is driven by capacity issues at College Station High School, and part of that is driven by bonding capacity and other factors as well.
Mr. Harris, I think I have something that might make us all feel better on that. One of the other trigger points that I didn't mention earlier is in what Dr. Yokin talked about, new development as they come up. Are they doing what they say they're going to do? Maybe one of the things that we need to look at to try to keep the emotion down is when a subdivision does get developed, maybe we should look at that particular subdivision. So when people start, like if it's a new subdivision, we start looking at that subdivision, look at the demographer, saying how many families are going to move there. At that point, maybe zone that new subdivision. So when people buy the homes in there, they know probably feel more comfortable. If, say, for example, Margraves Ranch, Margraves property, just throwing that out as an example. If one of the things that we're looking at before that's even a bulldozer go through there to start clearing, if we could look at that subdivision and if we have capacity issues at some of the schools, maybe zone that, and it might not be what the neighboring neighborhoods have, but at that point, when people are buying homes in that subdivision, they're knowing, hey, I'm going to Consol or I'm going to College Station High School.
Well, and I think that's a good, I think, Mr. Schaefer, those are the kinds of things that we need to proactively look at, because in the past we have reacted to overcrowding or a new school, and it's been okay because we've been a community and we've been able to talk things out, and we've now gotten to a point where we have to have more strategic, proactive planning on how we're going to deal with the growth, because the old way is not working in my mind. And so this is our opportunity to go back and help set policy for how it's going to be done in the future. So there's clarity, so that there's clarity among the parents, there's clarity among the community. And the importance of that clarity is this is one school district. And I vacillated back and forth between wearing my, two schools, one district T-shirt tonight, because there's not a bad track. And when you look at what people outside of our community evaluate our purple and maroon, there's not a bad track. And it's important that everyone in this community understands that. There are differences, but there's not a bad track. And we have to put in place more metrics and measures to ensure that we continue that way. Because again, we live in this community, we are your neighbors, and in some instances, we're your friends.
And Dr. Weston, I'd like to say one thing. To hopefully make you feel better. I know it's been tough on all of us. When the BAC brought the recommendation and we had the 3 forums, if you take a couple of the issues off the table, the Nantucket comments and you take out the grandfathering. I feel good and can put my head on my pillow at night knowing that we did not have that many complaints. I think where the motion charged was is we were trying to do our due diligence and probably we were digging in, and at that point, digging in for looking for knowledge and making sure we make the right decision. And I think what happened was is the emotions of everybody out there, us not making a decision, and they got the angst that, hey, the school board's going to decide. So I think that's probably where the, us probably, and again, I don't think we should have rushed to make a decision, but I think as we were exploring the stuff, I think that's where the rumors started going and things, the wagons kind of, wheels came off the wagon.
Yeah, I mean, I want to make it clear. I mean, when I make this motion, the motion is not coming out of an emotional place. Carol started my emotion tonight, so you can blame her. I'll write that on the.
She did mine a couple weeks ago too.
There you go.
We still love her.
I mean, our job is to rise above all that stuff. I believe that when I make that motion, I make it in good spirit, with full information of what's out there, what the logic of things are to me. I recognize that we don't have full information. Am I going to go to sleep tonight? Yes, because I probably haven't slept in 3 days at this point, but nonetheless, I'm going to go to sleep tonight. Am I going to wonder whether we made the right decision? The answer to that's going to be yes. I mean, I'll just be honest. I'm going to wonder. But I don't know if there's another option on the table that I won't wonder about. I will always be worried. I'll be happy about certain aspects of a decision that we make, and I'll be worried if the things that I think we might need to be worried about come to fruition. And partly a lot of this stuff is just, it's management, right? Whether we go 3-school split, there are going to be issues we have to manage. If we don't do it that way, there are going to be issues we have to manage. If we do it one way for our capacity, then we're going to have to manage something different. If we're going to have to manage a bond, regardless of whether it's 1 year or the next year. I understand that we have to take taxpayers' interests into account when we're going up for a bond. But we've also heard an enormous amount from our community that certain things, that they have a desire for certain things to happen. There's no point, whether we go up for a bond in 2018 or 2019, that there's going to be some room in Consol. It's just going to be the case. So we're going to either have to, I mean, to me, the only solution out of that is we go back to the drawing board and rezone Consol for 2,200 kids and College Station High School for 1,600. And I think we've had a mandate from the community that they don't want that they like the idea of these two schools being somewhat similar as they get bigger. Now, does that mean we're going to have to spend money and taxpayer money a year sooner than perhaps we would otherwise under that scenario? Sure. But I think we can also show the taxpayers how much money that we are saving as a school district by having both of those schools in the same UIL classification. So both of these things go back and forth. And I from a monetary standpoint, sure. I mean, part of me says other than the fact that it would cost a lot more money at that point in time, if we just built College Station High School for $2,400 right off the bat, we wouldn't be having this conversation. The fact is, we're having this conversation now because we were prudent then and saved off as long as we could before we had to add the second phase. So, but I mean, is there a part of me that says, absolutely, let's go back and redo it so that both high schools are at max capacity and they each have 10 temporaries sitting outside before we go ask for a second phase. but I don't think that's in the best interest of our students. I don't think that's the best way to make sure that they get educated. And so there's a fine line there. And any answer that we give, we're going to have issues to manage. But it's not like we've gone one board meeting without issues to manage over the last 3 years. And over the last 7 years, for some, 8. I'm just saying, somewhere over 9, 10. That, and it's going to continue to be that way. So I can either move forward with what we've been given and manage things the best we can after the fact. Anyways, so I guess it's important for me to say that this recommendation, this motion does not come from a place of I am frustrated with some of what we have gotten in the process. I'm not making it from a place of I want it done and therefore I'm willing to make an incorrect decision. I believe that this decision is as good as any other decision that we are going to come up with sitting here as a board within the next however many weeks we would want this to drag out. That's what I'm saying. So there you go.
You know, the interesting thing, and for three of us, is that, we made that decision back in 2010 to rezone, and there are unforeseen things. I think that we would all agree that some unforeseen things happened that the community's aware of and the community's not aware of that happened to change those low SES numbers. So I think you're correct in the fact that once we make a decision, it is a management issue because there is no way, none of us have a crystal ball. So we're just doing the best we can do today to make the best decision today, in hopes that we have, that we can take care of all the kids, which I have full faith that the district they have and continue. We wouldn't have, I look at this, we have low SES numbers that are out of whack, and yet we have 20 national merit scholars in this community out of 24 out of the county. That speaks volumes to me. It's close to dead even as you can get. I mean, I know one has more, but that's immaterial at that number, right? I mean, when you're talking 20. But what I do want to say is, if we move forward this, I still want to ensure that, and I still believe that we're going to have to be very diligent in watching, and I think the administration has heard this, is that we have to be diligent about that 15%. In making certain that those students are not disadvantaged. And I had a conversation today with someone that I really respect and said, perhaps she looked at it as an advantage. And I went, okay, do tell, because I want to hear this. And her thought is that so many of us have to deal with change as we get older, as adults. And one of the things that can happen with change is at home, when you have support at home or you have teachers that are watching this, that a change can be a learning experience too. And she felt like that 15% perhaps would get an education that some of the others might not get. It would be a different kind of education because they were making a change and having to adapt to the change. I just had never thought of it like that. My time sitting here has been, is it a disadvantage? Is it a disadvantage? I never thought to ask, is it an advantage? And then she was able to point out that perhaps it wasn't an advantage that these children were getting to learn to. And she also felt like it was an advantage that they would be able to know more people in the district, that they would indeed have more friends in some cases, and that they could be more community-minded. And I just thought I would share that with you because it was just a different way of looking at what that 15% was going to perhaps get to experience.
Can I go?
Yeah, go.
Thanks. Okay, so we talked about the need for maybe calling a bond election in 2 years. I can tell you, I'm not going to hit quite as much as Dr. Wesson on some of the feedback we've seen and some of the community involvement in the process that we've all experienced, social media being a large part of it. Early on, I talked about wants versus needs. One of our big needs is voter approval of a bond. We have, throughout this process, had a failure of people to recognize that we're all in this together and that we have a really good thing going here. And it's not something to be taken for granted. I've had no less than 3 people in the last 2 days ask me about a bond election and tell me that they will actively oppose it because of things they have read about them and their kids on social media. That's not a healthy situation. That suggests to me that the process needs to be revisited because we have, quite frankly, a good set of issues that we get to deal with here. I think the proposal is probably a good one that Dr. Wesson has made. I do still see some issues, but I think we can work through them in a more orderly fashion. And I think it's important for people to know that that's our job. They may see me ask a question or ask for a piece of information without knowing why. How many members of the public know how many years of the last 8 we've run a deficit budget? I bet not too many. How many people know how close we are on fund balance as we do that to where we cross the, quote, red line? Not many, right? How many know about bond rates and bonding capacity? Not many. All they see is the issue at hand and think that there's some nefarious plot at work targeting them. All words that have been used. These are things we need to work through. I mean, I don't know about you all, but when I saw that within 7 years we're looking at $355 million to $363 of bonds, and what that means is new schools. And we're just under those projections, our bonding capacity with rates being where they are today. Okay, the real translation, what does that mean to our operations budget? Y'all see how tight we are right now. I think we need to pause and take time and work through those issues and look at, well, what does it actually mean as we draw these lines in terms of cost to operate those schools? Y'all know I'm a numbers guy. I look at that. That's part of our job. Solvency of the district is an important thing. I know we've got good professionals doing it, but the public has tasked us with looking after their interest in managing their resources. So that's why I ask questions related to school capacity. I think that I would support the motion with the understanding that we come back as a group through whatever process we determine and start visiting these issues. I want to make sure that the 15%, which is lower than I like, is well taken care of. I know you all feel that way. I want to make sure we look at capacity. I want to make sure we talk about traffic. Nobody likes to drive farther. But fortunately, we have some highly competent professionals in this town who deal with things like major arterials and minor arterials, and they can tell us, well, what does Arrington Road look like? What does Welborn Road look like? How about Highway 6? What do these things do? What about George Bush? I mean, there are all these things that we need to work through as we're going through the process to make, I think, a very informed decision. Could it result in some change for people down the road? Absolutely. In fact, I am confident it will. What that is, I don't know. Who it will affect, I don't know. But I'm confident there will be change. I'm also confident that we will still have great schools. And I can tell you, Dr. Wesson clearly got emotional about that, and I understand it, because I can tell you the thing that was most hurtful to me throughout all of it, even, the personal accusations and things, I get that. I'm a lawyer, I get that all the time. But what was hurtful is how it's perceived by my kids and their teachers. At the worst case, I would be asking someone to go to school with my kids. How is that going to be part of some nefarious plot? Yet that's what we heard.
Any other discussion?
No, I will. It's coming. I say this knowing that I think most of the committee would agree, if not all the committee would agree with Dr. Wesson, that it's not perfect. And I think everyone who's looked at it might have had an issue here or there with it, whether it's capacity, which is obviously an issue at one school, or me with the middle school split. And I hate to keep beating the dead horse, but I do, and I realize it's my background. It's where I come from, where 3 went into 2. The plan that we looked at with that, with the SES and the capacity, I thought that answered it. However, I realize it is only splitting one school, which, in my mind is good. And I do believe that, a lot of the feedback we've gotten is positive in that direction. I realize that, when we talked about 100, 50, and people said, oh, would you want your kid at that 50-50 school? Well, no. Well, they're going to be there anyway. And no one would want to be in the 15, 20% split. No one, most. But with that said, it's obvious. This is what was interesting to me. The people, so many of the emails, that it was our duty to accept the committee's recommendation. And from the standpoint of they did present us a plan that fit the 4 parameters that we gave them, and I understand it from that standpoint. But on the flip side, is that really what they want from us, to be a rubber stamp? And I think half of them, were, well, they gave this to you and it fits, so you have to do it, and the other half were, wait, you got to look at this. And that's a tension point for me. And with that said, though, I guess I'm just talking out loud. I'm venting. I'm not looking for feedback. Although, if you know the answer, please let me know.
I don't think anybody's going to accuse us of being a rubber stamp at this point.
No, I think you're probably right.
Yeah, and I can provide feedback. Some of the emails on that point about what's democratic or undemocratic, and to suggest that the work done by people appointed by, no offense, bureaucrats to sit and, right.
You said no well before.
Right, that the work done behind closed doors, really in secret, and they did a fantastic job of maintaining confidentiality. I'd tip my hat to them for that. But to somehow suggest that product is more democratic than this, where we do our work out in the open with cameras rolling and Mr. Oliver there taking notes, and that we have to respond and be responsive and answer to the voters at the ballot box. There's your answer. This falls on us. Now, the work that that committee does is very, very valuable.
Absolutely.
And you know, the reality, we condense this complex thing that is taking a map and drawing lines on it and sending these kids to schools, and to come out with a product that has this few issues is a tremendous job. Now, again, I think, quite frankly, we need to maintain perspective and recognize we're lucky that these are the issues we get to talk about. But without question, I think the answer is it's on us, and I do think at this point, Dr. Wesson is correct. No one's going to accuse us of being a rubber stamp.
Well, and I guess just to conclude, if it was an either or, I know where I would stand, but having been on the losing end of a straw poll last week, if this is what's on the table, again, even with an issue here or there, I would go forward with it.
I'm with Mr. Nugent. I'm not sold on the junior high splits, or middle school splits. I think that, I really wish we could do something different there, but, and I'm concerned about capacities and bonding, because I've had several threats about opposing bonds coming up that we'll need in order for this plan to work. So I think it's probably the best plan we have on the table, but I don't think it's perfect. I think it's going to work well for 2 or 3 years, and if the demographers are wrong, then may work longer. But I think as long as we're all in agreement to figure out this process and these trigger points, then that we need to look at this annually, if not sooner, then I'm okay with it.
Before we vote, the one thing I think I would like to ask is, in terms of process, if you have any current thoughts on that, emailing those to the board president and Dr. Ely sooner rather than later, meaning we have an executive committee meeting tomorrow afternoon, so that they can get on the first available agenda, I think would be helpful.
And I agree with that. I think, if it were to be approved, my thought process would be that we would go to work, as you mentioned. Our first executive meeting is tomorrow on the issues, and look at the process based on the communication that we've gotten back. Some of the things that we've heard of is perhaps we need a system for yearly assessment. One of the things I think is very important that the community knows is that our goal is to maintain the standard of education in College Station ISD and ensure that all students within our school district get the right kind of education. And so, I think we've heard some discussion on what those drivers for change of a boundary might be, whether it be the percent SES, the capacity, the growth. I don't think we can honestly say that the middle school split piece is off the table. I think that it's something that, based on the feedback from the Boundary Adjustment Committee, it looked like the majority, though not a huge majority, thought that it would be better to split all three. I think it's important that the community know we'll probably have more conversation about that. It is, though, our responsibility to wisely manage your tax dollars, and we're going to do that not just based on one family or one subdivision. We're going to do it based on the entire district. Any other discussion? We have a motion and we have a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries 7-0. We're adjourned.